There's the legal mumbo jumbo. That was pretty simple. So, with no further ado, I want to welcome the most amazing contester I have run into, um, famous for so many things, running SO2 on CWT. Uh, he's the director of the CQ Worldwide contest. Doesn't get any bigger than that. Um, a great ham, a great guy, famous speaker. So I'll let him introduce the rest of what he has done. I'm going to turn it over to Bud AA3B, who was my first CW contact. Thank you when I was a student. Over to you, Bud.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks, Buzz. It's and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many calls out there, some of which I recognize. It's nice to see some faces that go with those calls. I just want to check. You can see my screen, okay?
Yes, I'm seeing a shared screen beautifully.
Okay, good. So what I'm going to go through here is a process that I've sort of developed over the years of thinking about how to operate a contest and how to maximize my competitive position. Okay. Now, to be frank, this presentation was built around one of the major contests that I operate, but I think the concepts that are presented here are applicable sort of any contest that you want to operate competitively. And that includes, the full-blown 48-hour events like CQ Worldwide or the hour-long events like the CWT. I think, the concepts that I'm going to go through here are applicable to that full spectrum of competitive radio sport. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been licensed. I was licensed at age 12 in 1970. I have held the current call that I have AA3B. I got that in 1978, right after the FCC started to issue 2x1 calls. So hence the AA3B was virtually the second call of that format authorized in the third call district. In addition to AA3B, I've held a number of DX calls, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my activities from Antigua in a chart or two. I am really a CW operator at heart, although I do operate all the modes. But I learned the art of CW in the national traffic system here in the U.S. and was true to that all through my teenage years and early adult years. I'm currently very active in what's called the Frankfurt Radio Club, which is, we would say the premier contest club in the universe. But in all seriousness, it is a club that has competitively won the CQ Worldwide and ARRL DX contests now for a streak of 6 years. I'm also active in the Pennsylvania QSO Party group that sponsored the event, and we had a real good contest last weekend, which was a lot of fun. And as Zach mentioned, I am the director for the CQ Worldwide WPX contest. I'm a member of the league. I'm a member of FOC. I'm a member of CW Ops. I belong to the A1 Operators Society. And as I mentioned, I'm an officer in the Frankfurt Radio Club. This is my station. It's what's called single operator 2 radio configuration, which really means that I can operate essentially on 2 bands interleaved. I can move very quickly back and forth between the 2 bands. I can make a contact on one band and then flip over to the other band very quickly and make another contact. So it's an operating strategy that's all about trying to time things so that you can seamlessly move back and forth between the 2 radios. And it's a lot of fun, but it takes a lot of practice. The station is set up essentially to have 2 independent chains. I have a K3 on the left here and a IC 7800 on the right, and they drive 2 ACOM 2000A auto-tune amplifiers. All the antenna switching is done automatically. I'm sorry, all the band selections are done automatically. The antennas are actually select it manually using the antenna switches that are shown in this array here on the right-hand side of the chart. In the backyard, in the backyard, I have 3 towers. I have an 80-footer that's on the left. In the center right is a 110-footer, and on the very far right is a 70-footer. Each tower has tri-banders on them, and then there's a 40 meter 2-element beam on the big towers, and also a 6-meter beam on the 70-foot tower on the right. In addition to the aluminum that you see, there's a bunch of wires running around. I have some directional antennas on 80 meters. I have 2 antennas on 160 meters, and off in the woods is a 500-foot reversible beverage. In addition to my home station, I have an interest in the station in Antigua. I use the call sign down there B26K, which I've held since 1998 when I went down there for the first time. I go down there and I operate on a very competitive station down there. We have 7 towers set up down there, and we have monobanders on each of the low bands. We have, including 2 3-element wire beams on 80 meters, one fixed on Europe and one fixed on North America. I've been very successful down there and had a lot of fun over the years. I've won the CQ Worldwide Low Power all band category, 17 times, I guess, since I first started going down there in 1998, and I currently hold the world's record in that event. So that's a little bit about me. So let's move into the presentation. What I'm going to go through here is sort of, again, the process that I've developed over the years for basically optimizing my ability to compete in contests, and I apply these concepts to virtually anything that I take seriously. So on a 48-hour contest, I will go through every one of these things, and indeed on the 1-hour-long CWTs, I go through many of these elements for every CWT. So it's a process that has served me well. Now, some of the things I'm going to go through here are kind of on the extreme end of the scale, but I want you to understand sort of the philosophies that I apply. And I'm going to segment the presentation into 3 separate areas. One is, how do you get ready for a contest? In other words, how do you plan for a contest? And then when you're in the heat of it, how do you perform? And then when it's all said and done, how do you scrutinize your results to figure out what you're going to do better next time? But at the very beginning, the thing I want to foot stomp here is the most important thing about being in contesting is to be active. If you want to compete, you've really got to be as active as you can be. And there's a lot of benefits to why you want to be as active as possible. Like, if you're in a lot of contests, you will begin to your call sign will begin to be recognized by other participants, and you will begin to recognize other participant calls. And some of you that are in the CWTs are probably experiencing that now. You get to the place after you've operated these things a number of times where you can start to recognize the call, even if you only get a fragment. Even if you only get 2 or 3 letters, you can often recognize the call and pull it through. And so there's a huge benefit from your ability to recognize other calls and from others' ability to recognize your calls. And that comes from being on the contest frequently. Certainly practice makes perfect, and you will find that as you operate more and more, your proficiency will grow. I'm sure some of you that have operated at the CWTs, for example, have experienced that. When you first operated in the CWTs, you were probably operating very conservatively, a little bit on the tentative side, and as you've gotten more and more into it, you've learned the flow, you've learned how to crank up your speed, how to improve your results, and your proficiency has grown. The other thing is you get to watch how people operate. You get to see how some of the big guns do it, and you can sort of learn from their techniques. By operating a lot of contests, you understand what's going on with propagation, and we are in a very, very exciting time propagation-wise right now with cycle 25 coming on. There's a lot of changes happening. and they're a lot of fun. I operated the Worked All Germany contest on Saturday, and was really, really excited about how wonderful 10 meters are. And I'll take that knowledge with me into CQ Worldwide, which happens at the end of this month. Certainly, the more you operate, the more you learn about your station, and in particular, you learn about your contest software. The software is very, very capable, and in some cases, very complex. And I'm still learning, about my software. I'm an N1MM user, and I learn stuff about that program, all the time, and it's really, really beneficial to be able to experiment with that knowledge. In things like the CWT. And you also get to know, what you're strong at and what you're weak at, and that helps you understand, how to practice and to tweak your strategy. So every contest is a learning experience. So I'm going to move now into the process that I use for planning for a contest. And again, I apply these concepts to everything that I do. In the case of the 48-hour contest, I will, do a very, very detailed analysis. In the case of the CWTs, I'll do a little bit lighter of a touch, but I try to be true to these every time I decide to do something seriously. So it starts by looking at the rules. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole chart, but there's some things that you really want to study when you're looking at the rules of a contest. The most important thing, in my opinion, is you've got to understand the math of the contest. You got to understand how the scorers worked. It will tell you, the importance of your of multipliers. It'll tell you how much time you want to spend chasing multipliers. It will allow you to make a decision about whether multipliers are more important than rate. It's important to understand what each QSO is worth. Because the values of QSOs are different from contest to contest, and understanding that math will influence your operating strategy. For example, in the CWTs, a multiplier is worth about twice what a non-multiplier is worth. So as you're sitting there operating the CWTs and you're trying to maximize your score, it suggests that you're better served by trying to work the multipliers, even if you could have a higher rate, working stations that you've already got in the log. So that's one of the main features. I mean, there's a lot of other things to be attentive to in the rules. One of the things is operating times, off times. Off times can fundamentally change your operating strategy. You want to be thoughtful about what category you pick. In particular, do you want to do assisted or unassisted? I prefer to do assisted when I'm given a choice. Assisted is a lot of fun. It gives you real-time awareness of where the multipliers are and what band is hot. But again, these are decisions that you want to make after you've studied the rules. The next thing I suggest is that you look at what the competitors are doing. Try to get smart on what they're up to. Many contests provide their logs after the fact. They will publicly share the logs, and there's a lot of knowledge that can be derived from going through those logs. In particular, you can watch what bands they were on as a function of time. And for those contests that have an off time, you can study, what their off time decisions were. And I'll show an example of that on a later chart. Another very powerful source of intelligence is 3830scores.com, which is where we share our scores after many contests. If you are intrigued, you should look at the comments that are in the 3830scores.com postings, because there's a lot of sharing about what went well, what the bands did, what didn't go well, what they would do differently. So there's a lot of interesting intelligence in there. The next thing that I like to do is I like to build a review of what the competitors did. So I will go and pull out of the results, what a peer group did in terms of QSO production and activity by band, and I'll study that to see, how I did, what did I do well and what did I not do well. And you can, also use this to help you set a goal, which I'll talk about in a chart or two. But just going back and studying past results and laying it out in a way that you can sort of ingest it is very powerful in terms of helping you to think about how you want to operate. There's also a lot of information that's being shared, particularly on things like Facebook and Twitter, about what competitors are doing, where they're going to be, what category they're going to be in. So keep an eye on those kinds of things and leverage them as you can pull on them. Here's an example of one of the things that I do for WPX. Now, again, this is a little bit over the top, but it gives you an example of how you can pull information out of the public logs to help you plan a contest. So the background on this is on the WPX contest. It's a 48-hour event, but you're only allowed to operate 36 of the hours. So you have to pick 12 hours to be off. And so what I did is I went and I looked at the competitor logs and I studied them to see, what 12 hours did they pick up or pick off. And I, typed all that information into a spreadsheet and, I tabulated what were the most popular choices. And from that, I saw that, there were certain times where, the competitors chose to be off, and that was suggesting that was probably, a good time to be off based on the collective wisdom of the crowd. And so I tabulated all that. And again, it was enabled by just being able to study the public logs. The next step is to understand propagation. It's really useful to look at what the bands are going to do, and what you want to look for is when are the bands going to be open, and also you want to understand what is the likelihood of some kind of geomagnetic disturbance or a flare or something like that. So looking at available sources to study propagation information is a good planning step. And the ones that I use the Voice of America Coverage Analysis Program, VOCAP, and I use that extensively to look at predictions of what's going to go on during the contest weekend. I'll look at the ARRL propagation bulletins, which are useful. They will give you a pretty real-time look at what the atmosphere is up to. During the contest, I'll keep an eye on some products from NOAA, including there's a real nice product that shows when flares have occurred and when geomagnetic activity is likely. It's a geophysical alert, and I'm sorry, it's a notification timeline, and then I will look at the 3-hour alerts that are put out by NOAA that summarize, among other things, the solar flux index, the A index, and the K index, because they are indicative of things that may affect the atmosphere. I've begun looking at the FT8 data derived from the PSK reporter as a way of understanding what's going on, because there's even though FT8 is not typically used in our contest, the activity there is indicative of propagation, and so it's interesting to see what it's saying in terms of band openings. And then a very, very powerful tool is the reverse beacon data. Reverse beacon network raw data. This raw data is available online, and it can be mined to understand propagation. I'm going to show you an example of that here. The setup for this chart is we were planning for last February's ARRL DXCW contest, and we were trying to figure out when the bands had opened. So what I did is I ingested from the raw data network. From the raw data available from the reverse beacon network. I ingested that information again into a spreadsheet, and I plotted the number of spots by hour heard by some local skimmers here. And it was basically a way of saying, when did the bands open and when did they close? And I plotted that data in the charts that are shown here, and it allowed us, that as we were planning for the contest, to understand, when to be on the band and when to be off of the band. So again, a pretty powerful tool that's available to you. And there's a lot of other things that this raw data available from the Reverse Beacon Network can tell you. I use it extensively to look at what other competitors are doing in the CWTs. It's very interesting to see, what their operating strategy is. Next, I suggest that you craft an operating plan. And by the way, I even do this for the CWTs. Now, this is a 48-hour example, but I do a similar example for the CWTs. And basically what I do is by time period, I'll say, hey, I want to be on a particular band because the band is going to be open, and I want to be pointing my antennas at a particular continent because that's where the activity is coming from or where their multipliers are coming from. I also want to be aware of other things that might be going on in that particular hour. Is there going to be some long path opening that shows up? Is there going to be some low volume area of the world where I might be able to get some multipliers? So I will lay out this hourly plan with the idea of understanding what band to be on, what direction to be looking at, what rare stuff is going to be on. And again, it sort of helps me, guide my operating approach in real time during the event. Next thing I like to do is to establish a goal. Okay, what you see here on the right-hand side is the goal format that I typically use. I will put down, by band, the QSO target that I'm after and the multiplier target I'm going after. This is based on looking at past performance of myself and my peers. Tie it back to that chart I showed a few minutes ago that showed what the peers did. I'll take into account anything that has happened since the last time I operate this contest. For example, did I make an antenna change, or has propagation gone up or down? I want to make sure that this is consistent from a time allocation point of view with the band plan that I went through on the previous chart. So, if I'm only going to be on 10 meters for 3 or 4 hours, I'm not going to set a target for 1,000 contacts. I'll set a target for 250, for example. And I like to set these targets high. You want to aim high here and push yourself. And I would argue that if you set the target, if you made the goal, you probably set it too low. Next thing you want to do through is just make sure everything's ready. Again, I won't go through every tick on this chart, but make sure your station is good to go. Make sure that if there's any intermittencies in the station, that you fix them before the contest. And there's always something that needs attention. Okay. Make sure that you understand or make sure you've got your contest software set up for the contest that you're going to operate. One of the things that often trip us up is, the macros that we use. Make sure you got your macros set up for voice contests. Make sure that your WAV files, the ones that do your automatic voice messages, are crisp. If you're going to use assistance, make sure that you've completely tested your DX cluster setups, including the spot filters that you're going to use. Turn off your Windows 11 or Windows 10 software updates. About the most stressful thing that can happen during a contest is all of a sudden, Windows decides that it wants to do an update. Some other things just to think about. Are you feeling good about your contest software? Is there anything new about your station that you really want to make sure that you've experimented with before you get into the heat of the battle? Are you going to be able to compete with the likelihood of minimal distractions from your family or your work? Did you get a good rest before the contest? are you, do you have the food and medicine and supplies that you have handy to handle whatever's going to come along? Is there going to be a thunderstorm or an ice storm or something that's going to come along that may, change your operating plan? So just kind of think through those sorts of things. So now you've done your plan. Hopefully you're ready to go, and bang, the starting gun goes off. So let's talk about how to operate. Sort of the rule of thumb that I like to suggest is that given a choice, that you start with whatever highest frequency band is open, okay? And particularly in the part of the sunspot cycle we're going into, it's an important choice because 10 meters this past weekend outperformed 20 meters during the German contest for a good part of the morning. It wasn't until later in the afternoon that 20 meters picked up. So it's important to be on the band, the highest band that's open. Thinking back to the math of the contest that we talked about earlier, you want to strive for operating strategies that maximize your QSO point rate, and that may be different from the QSO quantity rate. So for example, in WPX, you get more points for operating on 80 and 40 than you do on 20, 15, and 10. So in the spirit of trying to maximize your QSO point rate, you're much better off to be running Europe on 40 meters than you are to be running Europe on 20 meters, because you get twice the number of points on 40 meters than you do on 20 meters. And so even though the rate on 40 meters may be a little bit slower, you're doing a better job by operating on 40 meters. And that's an example of the thought process you want to go through. You really got to be, if you're operating competitively, you got to be efficient. Okay, efficiency is really important, and so you want to keep your exchanges as short as possible with the minimal amount of information. Okay, and that applies to both CW voice and RTTY. You really want to avoid things like thank you and 73s, and while they're very polite, they are counterproductive from a rate generation point of view. Now, multipliers are important. You need to work them. They, really will contribute to your score. However, you need to be thoughtful about how much time you spend in things like pileups. If you're sitting in a pileup for 15 or 20 minutes trying to pull a station out, and you could have worked 5 or 6 other non-multiplier QSOs in that same time, you're better off working those 5 or 6 QSOs. Sort of the example I give to people is I'm sitting down in the Caribbean at V26K. I'm going to be there all weekend. So the pileups that I have at the beginning of the contest are much fiercer than I'll have at the end of the contest. So waiting for me at the beginning of the contest in a huge pileup is not a good use of time. It's better to come back and pick me up later in the contest when the pileups will be a little bit more easy to break. Strive for accuracy. Accuracy is important. It provides a competitive advantage. And, from a WPX adjudication point of view, I see it all the time where, the rankings of the finish are often come down to who had the most accurate log. When you're operating on CW and you're trying to break a pileup, I suggest strongly that you try calling a little bit off frequency, either high or low. That often will be the trick. And when you're on phone, use common international phonetics and avoid, cute or, non-standard phonetics. Even though they may be understood by people that speak your language, they may be tougher on those that are not native to your language. During the contest, I highly advocate that you understand how you're doing against, some previous performance. I lay out I keep an eye on a spreadsheet here that allows me to look at my hourly performance against, what I've done in the past or against my target, depending on how I set it up. And it will, give me a comparison of where I am now, where I was against on my target, and what the differences are. And I'll keep that going on an hourly basis during the contest. Not I don't maintain this during the contest, but I'll keep an eye on it during the contest. This is a breakdown of how I spent my time by band in previous contests, and it just sort of keeps me aware of what band I was on in a previous event that might be of value in terms of formulating decisions about what I want to do for the balance of my time. And then I strongly recommend the use of the online scoreboards. These things are a blast. They really are. They allow you to understand how you're doing against the competition. And, you may not be competing at the very top. You may be competing against a friend or a peer group. And, you can see, how they're doing and whether you're, ahead or behind. And let me tell you what, there's been many times where these things have been highly motivating to me and have really made me push a whole lot harder than I probably would have otherwise done. The other thing that's interesting about these online scoreboards, and in some contests, you can see activity by band that your competitor's doing. So, you can tell whether or not you're underachieving on a particular band. So, this will help you inform your operating choices. Okay, so you've operated the contest. And hopefully you have felt good about how it went. So let's talk about your post-contest analysis. Okay, so the very first thing you need to do is get your logs in. Okay, so after the contest is over, and I stress this immediately after it's over, get your log in. Generate your log. It's in almost every contest in the world today. We use a standard called the Cabrillo 3 standard. Generate your Cabrillo log. Inspect it to make sure that there's nothing obviously wrong in the header. The header has information in it like your category, your power level, your address, things like that. Make sure that it's all what you thought it should be. Get your log in, turn it in. You want to do that because I hear these horror stories all the time about people waiting a while to turn their log in and having their computer crap out on them, or they have a situation where they're called away for some reason and they can't get their login. So get it in right away. If you need to resubmit it, you need to resubmit it. No harm, no foul. But get it in right away so that you get credit for your efforts. Make sure that your log is received. Go to the sponsor's website and look at the logs received page and make sure that your call is there. And I strongly suggest that you share your results on 3830scores.com. Now that's optional, but it's a real good practice, and it's nice to share your experiences. Now after you've gotten some rest and your head is cleared, go back and look at your results. Really critically analyze how it went. Look at your QSOs and multiplier counts by hour. What went well, what do you feel good about, what was it what smart calls did you make, and what would you do differently? And by the way, I do that after every single CWT. I go through a situation where I say to myself, what should I have done differently? Did you make the right band selections? Did you make the right time off selections? Look at what your competitors did. Did they do something that that really distinguished themselves? Was there any amazing propagation? What were your best hours and your worst hours? That's important. Did anything show up? Did you have any issues with the station? And make sure you get that written down. And I like to go through and read the 3830scores.com comments because there's a lot of real good nuggets in those. And then eventually you will get for most contests, most big contests, you'll get something called a log checking report, which summarizes, all the QSOs that you made, all the QSOs that had an error in them. And that's very, very interesting to study. It will tell you, basically, what you should have been more attentive to in terms of accuracy. So that was that. I will, I guess at this point, turn it over. Hopefully you got some nuggets out of this thing, and hopefully we can, get in some good questions and some discussions now. So I'll turn it back to Net.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. That was great. I'm sure people have a lot of questions, some of them from beginners, some from experts. So let me see, let me change my view to gallery. You can, why don't we have you pop up your computer hand or put your hand like this so I can really see it. Bud, you want to call on people? I'll turn it back to you. Can you see people or do you need help?
Why don't you go ahead, Buzz? You orchestrate it.
All right. So go ahead and Cuba, you had your hand up there for a bit. Do you have a question?
No, it was just applause.
Okay. Chris from Bern.
Yes, I'd like to ask what exactly means assisted. What is incorporated in assisted?
Okay, well, a great question. A great question. So what assisted is all about is using some external system to help you understand where activity is. Okay, the most commonly used external system is the DX cluster. Are you familiar with the DX cluster? Okay, well, so the DX cluster is the most common example of assistance. And in many contest programs, you can connect the DX cluster directly to your contesting software.
Okay.
And it will display available calls and frequencies where they're at. And that's a
Yes.
very, very, very powerful way of chasing multipliers or chasing stations that you need. And so
Yes.
that use of that kind of technology, of that strategy, is what we refer to as assisted.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Andreas, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe not a technical question, but so when you are in a longer contest, how do you plan eating? Like, do you eat in the downtimes, or do you prepare some food which you have with you right there, or how do you plan for this?
Yeah, there are a lot of issues there, very important issues. So, what I generally do is in that operating plan that I showed, I didn't go through the whole thing in detail, but if I went back and showed it to you, what you would actually see is there's off times that are scheduled, okay? And those off times are generally for rest. What I'll do is I'll try to typically eat after the off time period is at the end, okay? And then during on a 48-hour event, I also need to obviously eat period. I can ask to go up and go to the bathroom and things like that, and I will try to do that when I am changing bands. So if I'm gonna stand down from one particular band, that's generally a time when I will take advantage of grabbing a sandwich or going to the bathroom or something like that. Now, I also, part of the analysis that I will do on a 48-hour contest is I will go back and look at all the downtime that I took. And I can see that very obviously from studying the logs. And I want to make sure that, that downtime was as small as possible. And I'll actually set a target that says, I don't want to have any more than, X number of minutes of lost time for biology or for food or sleep or whatever. So I will lay all that out into the plan, with forethought and intent.
Great. I think Joe is next, and then we'll go to John.
Thanks, Buzz, and thank you, Bud. It's just great to see you in person and meet you. I had the opportunity just a couple times to work you on CWT, but I don't remember it too well because you were so fast that it all went by in a big blur, and that brings me to my question, and that is, are you totally automated, or are you hand keying sometimes? And what speeds do you find that the most really good contesters are using?
Okay, well, in terms of automate, let me say it this way. All CW copying is done in my brain. Okay, so all of that is inside of me. The sending that I do, I would say 98% of it is from a keyboard. Okay. The other 2% is if there's an extraordinary reason, I have a paddle, I have a iambic paddle here on the desk, and I will send with that. But in the contest, virtually all of not all of it, but the vast majority of the sending is done by the computer under a keyboard control. Okay. Now, in terms of speed varies. It varies greatly. Okay. In the CWTs, my nominal speed is 38 words per minute. But for guys that I know are, the upper echelon, I will send at 45. Okay. But the typical CWT speed is 48. I also have the ability to slow down to around 30 words per minute. I have a macro set up to do that. But it's interesting. Very, very seldomly do people ask for a slower speed or appear to need it. Okay. Now that's the CWTs. Now talking about other contests. In a contest where there is a serial number, I will start out at the beginning of the contest in the low 30s, and I will slow down as the contest progresses into the upper 20s. So, for example, in the Worked Germany contest that went on this weekend, it has I need to send a serial number in that contest, and I will send that serial number. I was sending at 33 words per minute at the start. And then this morning, as the last hours were winding down, I was sending at 29 word per minute. Okay. So, you need to sort of adjust it based on the content of the message. Kind of my rule of thumb, Joe, is that if the format of the message is fixed, I'll send faster. If the format of the message is variable, in other words, if it has a serial number, I will slow down as the contest progresses.
John, you were next, and
Yeah,
then
thanks.
then we'll do Bob K4LW after that.
Okay, thanks for the presentation, Bud. Very, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
So when you're at the sort of like inverse of planning your off times, you plan your on times. Like, my limit for really, copying well and tracking the contest is 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, and just kind of you bracket your time of being active to kind of recognize your own limits, I guess, in terms of the amount of time you can actually sit there and at the keyboard and work through it. And second part is that a Bengali sculpture behind you? Thank you.
Yeah, it is. It is a Bengali. It's a beautiful key. It was given to me as a Father's Day gift by my daughters, and it's just a machine. I mean, it is just a lovely, lovely key.
Is it a dual? Is it a dual paddle? Okay.
Yeah, dual paddle. I'm not sure I understood your first question about the bracketing. So say it again for me.
So, I mean, just you have a personal limit for, I'm really good if I can sit there for, 3 hours and then I really need to take a break. And so you kind of like, you plan your operating time around when you're most effective, or does that not even enter into the equation?
No, I now I understand. The contesting. Well, first off, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm also in very good physical shape. I have a resting heart rate in the 50s. I do over 8 miles a day, every day, except when I'm contesting, except during the 48 hours. So I have a fair degree of stamina. Okay. So I can last a pretty long time without, physical wear and tear on my body. Okay. Now that changes, if I'm in a 48-hour contest, one of the things that I've learned is I've got to sleep. Okay. I have to force myself to sleep. The first 24 hours, the adrenaline is running high, and I often think to myself, do I really want to take a break? But fact is that if I don't, I'm going to be really regretting it on the second day. Okay. I've learned to, sort of the signals that my body is telling me about, when I've got to stretch and when I've got to, shut down. I will tell you that on the 48-hour events, one of the things that happens to me sometimes is on the second night, I've got to stand up and operate. I mean, I can't sit still. I can't sit down because I'll fall asleep. And the other thing that starts to happen is you start to hallucinate a little bit. The room starts to, the perspective of the room changes. And so when I see those things happening, it's telling me that, I better take action or I'm going to be a hurting puppy.
Okay, thank you. Let's go with Rafael, Cuba, and then Heather.
First of all, thank you very much for confirming my first Antigua DXCC within a matter of hours.
You're welcome.
It was very nice to work you, and of course also at CWTs. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. The first one is kind of continuation of what you were just talking about. I'm not sure if I spotted in your analysis your sleep periods, but it looked to me like you operate 3 sessions in a 48-hour contest with 2 sleep periods. If you could elaborate on that a tiny bit. And the second question is regarding cut number sending when it comes to serials. There's been a very lively debate on CWO's groups a while ago, and I'm not sure whether you have shared your opinion on that.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, let me answer the first question. Yes, I will take 2 breaks during the 48-hour events. Okay, I will the first night I will take an hour and a half break, and then on the second night I will either take an hour and a half or 3 hours, depending on how I feel. So I try to take 90-minute intervals, which is the REM, the REM cycle sleep. But by the way, there's a very interesting treatment of sleep that was done by K5ZD. So if you want to see a real interesting analysis of sleep strategies during a contest, Google K5ZD and look for his discussion on that. I think it was recently posted on the CQ contest reflector as well. So, but to sync, yes, I have 2 breaks that I take. They generally correspond to the period of time between European sunrise and local sunrise. So in Antigua, when Europe sunrise comes up and we're still in the middle of the night, I will take a couple of hours there and be ready when the sunrise occurs in Antigua. So the next question was about the cut numbers. I think cut numbers are a reasonable thing for the number 1, the number 0, and the number 9. Okay, 0, 1, and 9. Any other use of cut numbers is not a good idea, in my opinion. I don't think that they're universally recognized, and I think that they're going to result in more requests for repeats. You're going to lose more time resending the information than you would have by sending the number straight out. So, cut numbers for 0, 1, and 9 are fine. I would strongly. I guess I can also see ENN, the E for 599, but I don't think you want to send E in a serial number. That is, not a good strategy in my opinion. So, that's sort of my opinion. Yeah, I stay out of the fray on those CWT or CW ops emailing things. They have a life of their own, and I read them and enjoy them, but I choose to sort of just observe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Kuba, you're up.
Thank you. But a question on DX cluster. You say about filters. Is it about do you use advanced filters like having displayed only the multipliers that you lack, or it is more of a general awareness what's happening, who is where?
Well, I've spent a lot of time, working with the filters. I have a really good understanding of them, and I have actually a full set of filters that I can apply during the contest depending on what I'm trying to do. Okay, but generally speaking, I will start the contest with a filter that is fairly open, allows a lot of things to pass. And then as the contest progresses and particularly interested in only some subset of things, I will, introduce a different filter that gets me to those subsets. Okay. But yeah, I keep it's nothing that fancy. It's just basically a Word document with a whole bunch of filter options in it, and I can cut and paste those. I can copy and paste those into the DX cluster as circumstances warrant. Okay. Now, there's also, for those of you that are using N1MM, be aware that you can select filters on the fly there. I mean, they have the ability to store some number of filters in the software that you can select during the event, depending on what you're trying to do. And I take advantage of that quite a bit. I think that's a very handy, flexibility. But yeah, the filter designs are very interesting and something to play with, because you can make some really powerful stuff, if you design your filter in certain ways.
Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, Heather, you want to go?
Okay, thanks for this talk. It's really interesting. My question is how would you change your strategy if you were operating QRP?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's some very effective QRP operators. I have, to be in the spirit of full disclosure, Heather, I've never operated QRP, so I haven't really thought about it much. But I will tell you that K3WW, who is a person that I'm sure the CWT operators on the list here will recognize him as being a really big gun. He has been operating in the WPX contests and in the in the QRP category, and has won the world. Okay, so when I look at the way that he does it, most of his contacts are done by search and pounce. In other words, he's going and finding people and calling them. He's very attentive to what the best band is to be on, because if you're QRP, you've really got to be on the band that is the most open. Okay, and he's very thoughtful about what bands that he's going to be on. He will actually run in short bursts. If he can find a frequency, he will run in short bursts. I believe that in general his frequency selection is towards the higher end of the CW windows, where you know, the competition is a little bit less fierce. So those are sort of the things that I've seen that he does. His operating speeds when he's operating or when he's doing QRP are, you know, they tend to be, you know, not as big gun speeds. You know, I would venture to say he's probably operating in the upper 20s, lower 30s. I think those are the kinds of strategies that apply. The other thing is to make sure that he's going after the you know, the big stations. You know, the big stations have big antennas, and those big antennas are all about trying to pull through, you know, the lower power or antenna challenged competitors. Okay, so you know, make sure you're going after, you know, the guys that you know, have the big antennas and the you know, the really nice locations. So you know, those are some of the strategies that come to mind. But Heather, again, in full disclosure, I've never tried QRP, so I don't have any firsthand, you know, acknowledge.
Hey, thank you. That's useful answers, though. It's very thoughtful. Thanks.
Sure thing.
Let's go with Brian.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I had a quick question regarding your hardware setup. You mentioned that you run 2 radios, and I'm wondering if you run a separate computer for each radio or you run both through the same software at the same time. I noticed you have 2 monitors, so I didn't know if you had one is showing you like your DXCC contacts, the other one your software, or if you're running 2 separate computers at the same time.
Now I'm running one computer, although there's many that run 2. I use one computer with a single keyboard. There are many others out there that use 2 keyboards, and I think they're using 2 computers. I'm not positive of that, but I use a single keyboard, and I am in the minority in that decision. Okay. Most people prefer the 2 keyboards because it, you know, it is a little bit less stressful in terms of transitioning between radios. Okay. However, I like to use the one radio or the one keyboard because ergonomically it's easier on me. Okay. Now, the reason that there's 2 keyboards is not because, I'm sorry, 2 displays is not because of 2 computers. It's because of information that I want to have on the second monitor. You know, I showed as I was going through this some of the tables and data that I look at while I'm operating, and so you know, the tables and the data that I look at are relegated to the second screen, and in some cases I actually have a third screen. So I will have, you know, three screens of information to look at, you know, while I'm operating, and again, that's you know, to keep an eye on all of that that stuff that you know, I showed you during the presentation.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
More questions? Anyone? Let's go with Dave.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Dave.
Okay, hi, Bud, and thanks for the cues and CWTs, and thanks for doing this. You mentioned earlier that SO2R can be challenging. I can only imagine. Could you briefly comment, or as long as you would like to comment, on sort of how long it took you to be comfortable with it and to where it was clearly adding a significant advantage to your score?
Yeah, you know, I don't know that I know the answer to that question. So, you know, my SO2R journey has been a long one. Okay, so let me just babble for a minute or two here. When I first started with SO2R, it was a different kind of operating approach than I use today. You know, fundamentally, what I was doing in the early days was I was, you know, running on one radio and picking off multipliers on the other radio. I mean, you know, that was, you know, I mean, it caused some stress, but it was not as complicated as what I'm doing today. but that paid off almost immediately. I mean, when I was able to pick up those multipliers on the second radio, the scores just started to go up, almost, immediately. Okay. Now, when the evolution into what I'm doing today, which some people called what is it, two-band ISQ, which is two-band interleaved something or other, I forget. But the journey that I'm on now, where I'm basically banging back and forth between the two radios, really started in RTTY. Okay. I operate a lot of RTTY contests. I do that quite a bit, and RTTY is very easy to bounce back and forth between two radios because the RTTY software is doing all the decoding for you. Okay, so you're just moving back and forth between entry windows, and all of a sudden your rates start to really shoot up. Okay. And so when I started to do that, I realized that there was the possibility of some maybe incredible rates that were out there. And then probably I'm going to say it was 7 or 8 years ago. N6MJ astounded the world by doing what we now are all emulating, which was he was doing interleave CQs on two radios, and that was a game changer. I mean, he just broke all kinds of records, and just astounded the community when he did that. And that's when I decided to give it a try, and it took a lot of practice. It really took a lot of practice, but I think after messing around with it for probably a year or two, it started to become pretty comfortable. And for those of you that want to dabble with it, the practice place to do it is try RTTY. That'll get you the basics of moving back and forth between the two sides. But in terms of trying it in an on-air experience, the best place to do it is the CWTs. I mean, they're just phenomenal place to do it because you get in, you do it for an hour, you learn something, and then 3 or 4 hours later, you get to try it again with whatever knowledge you got. So that's sort of my journey. I certainly not a crisp answer, Dave, but that was sort of how I remember it.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, let's see, who has not asked a question that wants to ask a question? Put a hand up. There were a bunch of hands before. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, I came in a little late, so I might have missed this, so apologize if you've answered it already. But do you use a receiving antenna? I assume you've got an antenna for each radio. How does that set up? How are you set up for that?
Yeah, so I have a receiving antenna, but that's not related to the SO2R. That's related to low band activities. I have a beverage for 160 meters and 80 meters. But the way that the antennas work here is I have tri-banders, and I have a tri-band stack in particular, and that tri-band stack has what's called a triplexer that feeds it, and the triplexer allows it allows two different radios to talk to the tri-bander simultaneously. So the two radios go through some high-powered bandpass filters that feed the triplexer, and then I can talk through the tri-banders with each radio. And then on the low bands, there's similar high-powered bandpass filters for 80 meters and 40 meters. I don't have a high-pass bandpass filter for 160 because I don't need it. But the antennas are shared between the two radios, basically, through the switching systems that I have here and the filtering that I have here.
Does that do it for you, Mike? You're muted.
as much as my technical mind can handle.
Okay. Well, if you want, I can help you with the untangle some of that at our leisure. Anyone else not a new first time question? Anyone else with a new question? Okay, then I'm going to go to Raphael and then Joe.
I have a lot of them, so I'll just limit myself. The question I've got is about getting more confidence running in CW. So I'm very comfortable search and pouncing. Obviously, when it's assisted, it's very straightforward. And at CWTs, that's how I would operate. I have never run in CWT because of the sheer fear of people coming back at me at 45 words per minute, and then I would be stuck in a loop of asking them to repeat the call sign like 18 times, and then my reputation would go, nobody would ever talk to me in my life, and the world would end. So if you could suggest anything to cure that, I would be grateful. And for record, in the other contests I have run, but I usually do it at the very last hour when it's like, okay, you've only got 1 hour left, so you might just as well try it now. Your reputation has only limited scope to go down.
Well, first off, the fear that you share is very common. It's a very, very, very common situation. Okay, and the fact that it is not fact. That's the wrong way of saying it. What I have seen over and over again is that people one day just decide to take the risk, and they just have a blast. They just have a great time doing it. Okay. And so that's what I would suggest to you is, give it a try. Recognize there may be a call or two that like just calls I miss. Okay, that happens. Okay, you can't avoid that. So asking for a repeat or something like that is just part of the game. We all have to do it. We all do it at every point in our journey. Okay, so that in of itself is nothing to be frightened of. Now, there are guys that will call you, faster than you're comfortable with. But you know what? If you think back on the early part of this presentation, I was talking about the power of operating a lot and starting to recognize call signs. What you find is that you will recognize the call signs. You will recognize them. And in some cases, you can even recognize them by their fist. So don't be don't be that worried. Okay, give it a try. The worst thing that happens is that you have to ask for a repeat. So what? I mean, I do it all the time. So give it a whirl. And by the way, it's a very common thing, Raphael. That I've heard of many people that have had the fear and have overcome it. So give it a try.
Thank you,
Raphael. My own personal experience, I just fell into by luck, was I was on a contest team, and we had two chickens together on the CW radio. And so we helped log with each other. So we'd sit there, with two of us, and between the two of us, it worked really, really well. And that's how I started running. Worked out well for me just by luck, because it was with a little team, and I had a fellow chicken.
Thank you.
For what it's worth, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Buzz. Bud, somebody just starting to get into the contest situation. What would you say is your most important app, or you have a lot of things that you use as an assisted operator contesting. What's the one you couldn't possibly do without? What's the one that gives you the most multipliers? And where would you recommend somebody really concentrate learning how to use in order to get higher scores?
Well, I think about it as a system, Joe, but I think the the thing that I found to be the most beneficial to me personally is the use of assistance. Using the getting smart with the DX cluster, understanding how the filters work, and being able to apply that knowledge to your particular competitive situation is very, very, very powerful and useful. Okay, you learn a lot if you can master the DX cluster. If you can tame it to produce spots that you want, it will really, really be a game changer for you. So that's probably the biggest lever that there is.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Great. More questions? Somebody? Anyone? This is your chance. I think Bud is very open to any level, any question. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to double check. Earlier, you mentioned that 38 words per minute is your nominal speed for CWTs. And would I assume that that's typically what you call CQ at?
Yeah.
38.
Yeah, I call it CQ, and also if I'm doing search in pounds, my exchange will be at 38.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I've often wondered what the ideal CQ speed is from the standpoint of, not being too slow for the great operators like yourself, but not too fast for some of the newer operators. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just expand on that a little bit. As I mentioned in the presentation, I actually do a data analysis following the CWTs. Okay, I actually pull down the reverse beacon network data and I look at what the competitors do. Okay, and one of the things I look at is what their speeds are, because that information is in there. And so when you look at the speeds out there, if you look at the speeds at the guys that are at the top of the list, they're all 38 or 39. There's one person that's in the 40s. I won't give the information away, but most of us are in the upper 30s.
That's good info. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rafael, did you have another question? I'm guessing.
Yes, I do. It's a question about propagation. So the tool that you use, the VOACAP program, which I have also used and found to be very, very helpful. It definitely helped me figure out when to be on air to score some of my longest distance contacts. I may be wrong about it, but my understanding is that it does not change its prediction based on the current geomagnetic situation, but it uses historical data and basically gives you the prediction that you somehow then have to reevaluate by using additional knowledge. Is that correct? And
Yes.
Do you second guess it by using your experience, or am I misunderstanding it?
No, you got it exactly right. VOACAP is a program that does not consider your current geomagnetic situation. It doesn't look at the solar flux index today, or your A index today, or your K index today. It's looking at my understanding is that it looks at a very large collection of historic data from various points in the sunspot cycle and makes predictions. So it's a predictor. It is not a real-time source of data. Okay, it predicts basically what will happen. So the way that I think about it is I'll create the predictions, and then I'll augment those predictions with as much real-time information as I can get my hands on. Okay, so as I said in the presentation, I will look at things like the NOAA timeline for geomagnetic activity. I'll look at things like the 3-hour NOAA reports alerts that come out that says, we've had a flare, or, the K index is thus and so. And I'll use that to try to, tweak the, adjust the predictions from vocap. And then the other thing, that I play with, and I showed an example of this, is I'll go and I'll look at the reverse beacon network data, and I'll see, how does it compare with the prediction? So, for example, right now, the reverse beacon network is showing that 10 meters is much better than vocap predicts. Okay. So, as I'm thinking about my operating strategy, I will say, okay, I know what vocap is saying, but I'm going to more likely consider, what the RBN raw data has suggested, because it's, it's current truth. So vocap is a view, but you need to augment that view with, other data that you can get your hands on. Okay.
Thank you.
Can I throw a question myself in here? I think it would be useful for everyone if you could maybe describe your actual operating and what filter you use, why do you use APF, physical versus digital DSP, just how you operate. What do you do with the gain? Do you go into your K3S and do custom AGC settings? Do you ride the gain? You see where I'm heading with this, right?
Sure. I use 250 hertz filters during CW, and I have a set of for my K3. I have a set of AGC settings that were provided by N6AA, which I've used and I have not played with much over the years. I just set them based on what N6AA had suggested. I don't play with the RF gain ever in a contest, or when I say ever, I mean very, very rarely. The only time I'll ever play with it is if we've got some very high QRN conditions or something like that. So I really don't mess around with the RF gain. I will occasionally use APF if the band is very, very crowded, but not typical. Okay. So again, 250 hertz filters, and a set of AGC settings that very smart people suggested, and I've used. So.
Okay, thank you. I think people appreciate that. More questions? Anybody? Jerry.
Yeah, Bud, do you use any type of CW decoders?
No, I don't. Everything is decoded, mentally. So no, I do not.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Tony, please go.
Hi, Bud. Thanks for the presentation and sharing some tools of the trade. I have a super small question and then one that's maybe more involved. The small one is how much of an effect do you think that CW weight of a call sign makes a difference? Obviously, mine is extremely long. And the second question is what your main criteria is for making decisions between search and pounce and running.
Yeah. First off, on the CW, on the weight thing, I think that a couple of thoughts. I haven't really considered the weight much, but the thing I would say to you is pick a weight and stick with it. Okay. Whatever weight that you pick, stick with it, because people, again, there's a lot that the human brain can do to recognize a call. Okay, so if you're you have a signature that people remember, don't change it. Okay, so your call is very, very easy to recognize, even though it's long. when you hear LLD, you know what it is. Okay. I mean, we know what it is. So pick a weight and stick with it. Okay. There are people that have their weight setting incorrectly, and that just hurts them. Okay. It's just too heavy, and it makes it very difficult to differentiate between a dit and a da. Okay. So, extreme weighting it will hurt you, but pick a weight and stick it with it. Okay. So, I'm sorry, I forgot your second question, Tony. Hit me again.
It was about what's your
Oh, yeah.
main criteria or tools for switching between search and pounce and running, and also I guess band changes too while you're running.
Well, again, that's a lot of it is sort of based on the planning that I do up front. Like for example, in the CWTs, I actually, I will write down, based on what I've done in the past and what the competitors are doing, and what the crowd is doing. I study what the crowd does a lot, and I know that the crowd is going to move. One of the things, I'll give you an example. A secret of the trade is, on the 1300 session on CWT, the crowd changes at around 1340. Okay, something happens. All right, they either go to 20 or they start to do their own CQing or something. But there's a change in the crowd. So at 1340, I will likely move from running to search and pounce. Okay. And that's again part of the pre-planning that I'll doing. Now on the fly, plans are good, but you have to make decisions on the fly too. Not everything can be planned in advance. So on the longer contests, I will generally shift bands based on an understanding of what propagation is going to do. I know that Europe is going to be pretty good at this time of day, and that at this time of day it's going to be better to be on South America. So I'll make a shift there. On some contests, I kind of make a decision that if the rate has dropped below a certain threshold, I'm going to make a change, and I'll make whatever change decision I make. But I will look at the rate as a threshold, and if it drops below that threshold, it's telling me I gotta do something different. Okay, so that's sort of the thought process that I go through, Tony.
Thank you.
Okay, don't miss your chance here. Go ahead and ask the question. Put up your hand. Put up the little computer hand. All right, well, I will jump in and ask one then. So, Bud, first of all, I want to thank you for a fantastic presentation. People could not be happier, I can tell. And the question I wanted to ask is, I drag kicking and screaming, quaking, trembling, my students into doing CWT. How many will never forgive me for that? See? And I start at the fundamental. We have beginner, fundamental, intermediate, and advanced classes. And the academy requires the top 2 classes to work some CWT contacts. I actually start one class below that because I find that it's so daunting for students that I want to help them break into it slowly in the class where it's not required, just to lower the stress quotient, because it's by far the most stressful part of taking the CW Academy CW courses. So I'm asking you, what would you recommend for terrified CW students? How, why, what to do to approach? Any help you can offer for them, I'm sure they and future students will be all ears.
Well, first off, we all started somewhere. I mean, so every one of us began, and so the fact that we all went through this means that we all sort of understand it. I mean, we recognize and have and basically cherish, new blood in the hobby. Okay, so the fact that you're new at it is not something to be concerned about. I mean, we were all there at one point. Okay. Now, I can't say that all hams are, um, ladies and gentlemen, but most are. Okay. And we most of us are very, very tolerant and accepting of people that have a different level of skill than we have. Okay, so the fact that you're not at the top tier or something is not a reason to not try to something new. Okay, so long-winded story, say, like, most of the people that you run into are pretty good people, and most of them are pretty tolerant, and most of them are not going to go after you. Now there may be an exception to that, but there's exceptions to everything. Okay, so my advice would be to just jump in. Okay. Now the CWTs, they get going pretty good, but there's these other hour-long contests that are out there too that are also basically great learning experiences, and I think the operating speeds are a little bit lower, and you could wet your whistle on those things, but there's a lot of people that I can remember when they started in the CWTs that are now cranking it out at code speeds that are eye-watering. Okay, so don't be frightened of learning, and don't be frightened of being stumbling a little bit, because we all went through it, and the vast majority of us understand that you're new, and have a level of patience and appreciation for your willingness to get in there and learn. So.
Okay, thank you. And I just personally want to mention to you personally that I tell my students to get going with as many aids as they need, whatever, things that identify stations, history files, membership roster from CW Ops, whatever. And then I try to get them to slowly remove them and eventually end up with just a pencil and paper and a key and work head copy CWT. Now, of course, this is just for an 8-week course. They're students. All my students are using paddles to send, but I can't even begin to tell you how many students have come back and told me they have either worked you as their first or have worked you, and universally it has been a wonderful experience for them. It's just you're the station I hope they run into, because you have an incredible set of ears. No matter how shaky they are sending to you, you seem to always come back with their call and work them, and it's smooth and successful. And of course, that is because of the whole other skill sets you have for contesting, but it actually tends to work extremely well for all these people coming into CW and contesting and CWT and eventually CW Ops. So I know I speak for everybody that we all thank you, because you may not know it, but you're famous among students as well as other contesters. Other questions? Somebody want to, Raphael, you want to have another poke at Bud?
No. Can I ask a very quick question on RTTY? Do you use FSK or AFSK?
FSK.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Do you ever work FT8?
Yeah, I do. I do a lot of FT8. As a matter of fact, I mentioned to you that I work out every day. When it's nice out, I'll go outside and walk. I walk. That's my workout. But when it's not nice, I'm on a treadmill. So I'm on a treadmill for 2 hours, to get my 8 miles in. And during those 2 hours, I will use FT8 to pass the time.
That's good. That's good. I thought you were going to say you went out for an 8-mile run and worked DXCC on FT8 while you're out there.
No, I remote into the station, and I remote into my station down here using TeamViewer, and I operate FT8.
And what power do you run on FT8, or are you allowed?
I run 100 watts.
100 watts.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a friend who was at lunch complaining he burned the final out on his KPA 1500 on FT8.
Yeah, that's probably a little over the top, I would guess.
We thought it was way over the top.
Yeah.
We thought it was sort of justice. Okay, so FT8 is a thing. What's your balance between CW and sideband on contesting? And RTT, give me a percentage for each mode that you contest in, off the top of your head.
It's mostly CW. I operate the very large RTTY events, and there's probably 3 or 4 of those a year. And I operate the very large sideband events, and there's probably 6 or 8 of those a year. But most of my time is on CW. I could give you a breakdown if you'd like, but it's my guess is it's probably like 70% CW and 30% everything else.
And why do you love CW? What was your dream going into it? I guess I'm going to ask you how you started, and what was early Bud Trench learning CW like, and what was your imagination dream that CW was going to do for you, and then where have you come to? What is it that is the one thing that really does it for you with CW?
Well, by the way, I have another presentation, if the group ever wants to see it, that walks exactly through that journey. But let me kind of give it to you at a high level. I started into radio as a CBer, back in when I was maybe 11 or so, and I decided that it wasn't really the right thing. I mean, there was just so much goofiness going on there that I really liked the idea of being able to talk to people, but it just struck me that CB wasn't the right thing. So I moved from CB into ham radio, and when I did that, I just sort of had lost a desire to talk in real time with people, because again, CB was just so wacky, so I learned the code, and I really got very comfortable with learning it. And then I got introduced into traffic handling, which was a phenomenal training ground. I mean, it was just an amazing way of learning the art of CW. You got to learn how to be disciplined. You learned about how to be accurate. You learned how to, get the information through despite very challenging, band conditions and weather conditions and things like that. And I just got completely enamored with the traffic handling side of things. And, I started to progress through the traffic handling system echelons, and I learned a lot through that process. So my love for CW, really came from the transformation of being disgruntled by voice operation as a CBer, and then finding just absolute joy from traffic handling. So that's really where I got to be, how I got to be into CW the way I am.
And what would you recommend for, I feel that recognizing call signs and contest speeds is almost a specialized skill. I find that there's a lot of contesters that are like, oh, I can't write you at 25 or 30, but I can copy call signs at 45. Do you train on Roof ZXP or Morse Runner? Or did you learn by training on that, or was it all by contesting?
Well, when I started, there were no such things. Okay, there really wasn't around. So my learning experience was really through just being on a lot of different contests. And I mean, by the way, I'm also pretty active outside of contests. I operate a lot of casual stuff. I mean, I don't chase DX per se, but I will sit on a band and work a lot of people outside of the contest periods, and I enjoy that immensely. Now I have experimented with what is it, Roof Z. I mean, when we were messing around with early SO2R days, I was experimenting a little with that, and it's a great program. I mean, it really is it's a very good tool, and I wish I'd had it when I was learning the art. But that was really the extent of which I used that tool. Most of my knowledge comes from just being on a lot.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask for any final. Bob, you have a question, or go ahead, Bob.
Hello, Bud. Good to put a face with many contest QSOs. So thanks for doing this. You've actually answered most of my questions, but I do have a very small question that kind of bugs me. And that has to do with serial numbers and leading zeros before you get to 100. Do you consider using leading zeros a best practice, or is it something you dispense with?
Yeah, personally, I don't use leading zeros. I do not use leading zeros when I'm sending. Okay, I don't think it's necessary. Okay. Now, having said that, you need to sort of read the rules, because some rules are pretty specific about you will send a 4-digit number. Okay, some rules call that out explicitly. In those contests, I will use leading zeros, but unless the rules explicitly say that you need to use 4 digits, I will avoid leading zeros.
More questions? I have one. A student asked me, and I and a couple of other advisors gave the best answer we could, but I'm hoping even a better one will come. So their question was to me, I think I have an exchange. I think I'm in the log, but I'm not sure the other station got it. I'm not sure that I'm in their log. What do I do?
Well, this is an interesting question that it's contest dependent. Okay, let me tell you why. All right. This is sort of, if I was going through the details of, remember in the chart that I said about the rules deep dive, if I was going to go through all of the details in that chart, I would dwell on this point, because here's the reason why it's contest dependent. In some contests, if that other station doesn't log you and you do, you lose the QSO, and that's life. no harm, no, you know, you lose the QSO. In other contests, if you lose that, if you don't, if that guy didn't log you and you do, you not only lose the QSO, but you are assessed penalty points. Okay. So you have to understand, you know, what the rules are from a penalty point of view. Okay. Now, having said that, if you believe that the person heard you, then and you have, you know, better than a 50% feeling that they've got you, move on. Sort of would be my advice.
And just the other question, the follow-up that I got was when you call the runner and it comes back with the wrong call sign. So, you know, I'm AC6AC, you hear AC6AL. You know, I told them to wait a second, see if there is an AC6AL, and if there's not, send quickly AC6AC. What would you do?
Yeah, that's the right. I think that's a good advice, Buzz.
Okay, those were my. Bob, go ahead.
Your comment, Bud, just triggered another question regarding that. If you call a station, he comes back with the wrong call sign. Do you think it's better to send just your call, or is it better to send your call sign with the exchange?
You know, it's a really interesting question. I don't know what's better. I would tell you that you know, it probably boils down to the station you're trying to work. You know, if it's a station that you work regularly, you know, if it's a person that should know your call, then I would just send your call sign and the exchange. Okay. If on the other hand, it's not somebody that you normally work or will recognize your call sign, then I would send your call again and wait for that person to call you correctly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Thanks.
Other questions? So I have a question, but I have a feeling a lot of people here will work a few QSOs. They'll work 5 QSOs in some contest, like a state party or whatever. And then they're wondering, geez, do I need to send in a log? Or, you know, I work 2 QSOs. You know, what are your feelings about, you know, they're out there, those hams that just kind of are passing through or passing by, and here, you know, a station work 2 and then go on. How important is it for those logs to go in versus not? And I already know a little bit. You're going to say it depends on the penalty points.
Well, you know, in most contests, not all, but most, you know, if a person works 2 people and doesn't send in a log, there's no penalty to anybody. Okay, I mean, you know, you know, if you were one of those 2 QSOs, you don't lose anything as a result of that other person not sending in a log. So it's not that it's a punishment, or it's not going to affect your score. Okay, you know, as a contest adjudicator, you know, we don't use, if we don't get a log from a person, you know, we don't penalize, you know, those people that worked you. Okay, I mean, that's not an issue at all. Right now, it's helpful though to send in your logs. Okay, I mean, it's helpful to the log checking processes. Okay, so you know, I would ask that, you know, unless there's a good reason not to do it, you know, if you didn't copy the information down, you know, or you know, if you weren't adhering to the rules, then yeah, then don't send a login. But otherwise, I think it's a good practice to do it. It helps the contest sponsors. In the CQ Worldwide WPX contest, we will actually go out and try to nudge people to send in logs that we know are out there, because they help us ensure the integrity of our results. So but there's no harm to anybody if you don't send your login. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt.
Thank you. Thank you. So people shouldn't be scared off completely because they're afraid of working a few stations and they're not going to break anything.
Nothing's broken.
And the same with CWT. If you get a student who's fumbling on your frequency that you're running, I'm going to assume they're not bothering you, that you will either work them or, forgive me, just steamroll them and keep going.
Yeah, the sort of my rule of thumb is I'll try my best to finish the contact. Now, in some cases you can't, and you have to move on. But a lot of times, a second pass and everything is fine. So if you're gonna take the time to have the first pass, then it's just prudent to close the deal. Okay.
As a adjudicator of great experience, how much cheating goes on in ham radio contesting?
Yeah, there's cheating that goes on, but there's cheating that goes on in a lot of things. I would say that the cheating is part of why we have adjudicators. I mean, that's why you need them. Okay, you need to put a little bit of back pressure on those folks that are trying to do something underhanded. That's why we do the adjudication. So it's a necessary situation. I would not by any means suggest that it's widespread, because it is absolutely not, but there is some. And we every year we have to disqualify somebody or other because of something that they've done. Every contest we warn people about certain behaviors or things that they need to not do anymore. But we're talking about a dozen entries, maybe not 100. It's sort of in that realm. Okay.
I advise my students that if you're worried about your reputation as an operator learning, go ahead and go out on the radio and fail, because everyone else has, and that's how you learn, and people are very understanding. And 3 years from now, no one's going to remember that you were a fumbling call sign 3 years ago. But if you don't read the rules twice before you get on and operate a contest, people do remember someone who breaks the rules. And I try to actually teach them to read the contest rules at least twice as a minimum before getting on. Two very different things.
Yeah, well, I might say it a little bit differently. If you make a mistake and you send something that is not per the rules or something like that, that's one thing. I mean, we all make mistakes. If, on the other hand, you're cheating, a cheater might be somebody that claims to be QRP but is actually running high power, or a cheater might be somebody that is, assisted but claims to be unassisted. Those are cheaters, and when they do that, that reputation is lasting.
Right, exactly. And that's partly why I want them to read the rules twice, because some of them don't know what assisted is.
Right.
And before they realize the hard way, I want them to read the rules and do it. More questions for Bud, or do we let him go? Rafael, what do you think?
I think it was magnificent. Thank you very much for arranging the talk. Thanks to both of you, Bud and Baz. I will park my questions for the next opportunity. I hope there will be another one.
Okay, let's all unmute and give Bud the recognition he deserves.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Great questions, great dialogue. Look, hope to see many of you in the logs here, and I wish you all the best on your CW journey.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking time out of your ham radio to give back. And I know you do in many ways, but here and now we thank you in a big way. 7-3, my friend.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to end the recording now, if I can figure out how to do that.